Hello, good morning all. Welcome to September's legal update webinar from the compliance people. My name is Matt. I'm one of the internal consultants here on the team. I'm joined for today's session by my colleagues Alison and Valentin, who will introduce themselves later on in the session. So the webinar should take about 45 minutes to an hour. The agenda for today is as follows. I'll run you through the legal updates that we've seen over the past 6 months. Some of the key topics that we'll look at is changes to waste separation rules in England and upcoming changes that start to come into force from next year. We will look at changes to conformity assessments and marking. This is predominantly for Great Britain, but it might apply to organisations outside of that jurisdiction. We'll then look at changes to waste and emissions laws, finance and sustainability reporting, eco-design requirements for products, building and planning changes, changes to vehicles and systems and components for them, and finally we'll have a look at changes in law related to wildlife and wildlife management. If you aren't a subscriber with the compliance people, some of the key topics we do actually publish articles on every single month. So if you're not aware of some of these changes and you want more detail after the webinar, but you don't subscribe to the legislation update service, if you go on our website, thecompliancepeople.co.uk/updates, you can get articles on the key topics, particularly waste separation changes in England, where it explains the rules, changes, and gives a lot of detail, and the changes to conformity assessments and marking. You can also, as well, even if you're not a subscriber to us, you can sign up for free monthly newsletters as well, where they'll deliver the articles direct to your inbox. So I'll be covering the legal updates. We've then got an on the horizon section, and this is where my colleague Alison will look at what are the key changes that we know are coming over the following months into 2015, and also kind of what we expect as well. At the end of the session, we'll run a live Q&A. So during the webinar, if you've got any questions in terms of what the legislation means or you want more detail, please pop a quick question in the Q&A feature in Zoom. My colleague Valentin will lead on this at the end, and he'll be monitoring all of the questions as they come through. We'll look between the three of us to answer as many as we can on the call, but if we don't answer them all, don't worry. What we'll do is we'll take all of the questions away. We'll send you an email, likely within the next week or so, where we'll go through the questions and provide answers to all of them. Well, just a reminder, if you are a LUS subscriber and you've got a more detailed question on the application of the law to your organisation, you've always got the helpline service on LUS as well, where you can send us a quick email and we'll go into more detail and look at how things specifically affect your organisation. So that's the agenda for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So let's have a look at what has changed over the last 6 months. We'll start with waste separation. This is very specific to England. Different rules apply across Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and outside of the UK. So the separation of waste England regulations came into place a few months ago. Despite what the title might suggest, this isn't actually the main law that covers the requirements for waste separation and collection. I'll explain that in a moment in the new rules. But this piece of law has made a couple of significant changes. The first change is that it is given strict definitions of recyclable waste and the 6 recyclable waste streams that you can see here. So there are now clearly defined definitions of what is recyclable glass, metal, card and paper, plastic, food waste, and garden or green waste. So that's important because those kind of definitions apply for current rules as they stand now, and they will also apply for the new rules, those definitions. So the current rules in England, if you're not aware of, is that basically for certain premises, a waste collection authority or waste collector has to collect at least two of those types of recyclable waste. Um, that is all going to be changing, and we'll look at the new rules in a moment. But in readiness of the new rules, what has happened with these regulations is it's also introduced different premises that must adhere to the current rules of having two types of waste separated and collected separately to your household or general waste. So previously, these rules applied to care homes, schools and education premises, and hospitals. These rules now apply for places of worship, penal institutions, charity shops where people donate household goods, hostels, and premises that are used solely or primarily for meetings. So basically, those five types of premises now have to follow the current rules of separating and arranging collection of two types of recyclable waste separate to their general waste. And that is in readiness for the new rules that we'll look at now. So the rules themselves, the key rules for waste collection and separation for England, are actually held under the Environmental Protection Act 1990. And the new rules are as follows. Basically, where it's possible, all six types of these recyclable waste streams have to be collected. So the previous rules meant different councils and local authorities were collecting different types of waste, and there was no consistency across England. The new rules will require that there is consistency everywhere. So basically, all six of those dry recyclables need to be collected. There are allowances, though, that you don't have to separate these where it's not feasible. However, there are still some separation requirements between these waste streams. So glass, metal, paper, and garden plastic, they should be collected separately from each other, but if that's not possible, they can be collected together. Likewise, food waste and garden waste should be collected separately from each other, but where it's not effective or efficient to do so, again, they can be collected together. So at minimum, it means that most premises are going to have at least three separate collections. So you're going to have your general household or general industrial waste. You're going to have your dry mixed recyclables, your glass, metal, paper, and garden plastic. And then you're going to have your wet recyclables, your food waste, your garden waste collected separately. But for some organisations, depending on what is feasible for waste collection, you effectively might have 7 different collections. In terms of these new rules and when they'll apply, the date, if you're either a commercial premises, an industrial premises, or you're one of the 8 relevant non-domestic premises we looked at a moment ago, these new rules applied from the 31st of March next year. So just over kind of 6 months away. For domestic premises, because you might be interested for your own use at home, it's a year later. It's the 31st of March 2026 that these new rules apply. Just to make you aware, the new rules won't apply equally everywhere. So there's this commencement and transitional provisions regulations from this year, and this is linked in the article that we've got online. Basically, certain waste collection authorities, i.e. local authorities, have been given extended deadlines to put the new rules into place in their area. It is predominantly councils and authorities in the northwest and northeast of England that have been provided extensions, and the extensions vary. So if you want to double check in case your local authority has got a deadline and the new rules won't therefore apply to your premises, go and have a look at that. It lists every authority that has an extended deadline and the date that the new rules will apply for. So that's the changes to waste separation and collection. We'll now have a look at conformity assessments and marking. And this is particularly important if you manufacture or place products on the market. So these changes predominantly apply to Great Britain, and you might remember that after Brexit, we basically announced that for Great Britain, we were going to scrap the recognition of CE marking, and there were different conformity assessments and marking options made available. UKCA marking for Great Britain and UKNI marking for goods in Northern Ireland. However, last year, basically, the government backtracked on that and said, no, we're going to accept CE marking for European conformity indefinitely for products all across the UK, not just Northern Ireland. So what we've seen is the Product Safety Metrology Amendment Regulations came into effect, and this basically updated 21 product laws which allow this indefinite recognition of EU product conformity and CE marking. What that means is that basically products that have the CE mark will be recognised as safe and conforming as they do now. This covers products such as machinery, lifting equipment and lifts, pressure equipment, batteries, and PPE. So basically, all the equipment that currently or previously required CE marking, that's been updated and still allows CE marking. Just as a quick summary, this table basically shows what is allowed everywhere. So products requiring safety, health, and environmental conformity, CE marking is accepted everywhere. In Northern Ireland, the UKNI mark can be used as well as CE marking together. They can't be UKNI can't be used individually, has to be with CE marking. And in Great Britain, as well as those, the UKCA mark will be allowed as well. For aerosol dispensers and measuring containers, the reverse epsilon symbol continues to be allowed. That is what's used with those types of products, not a CE mark. So in Great Britain, we'll continue to accept the reversed epsilon on aerosol dispensers, as well as the UKCA mark that was introduced. For transportable pressure equipment, the PI mark is used in the European Union and Northern Ireland. For Great Britain, this is the row mark. So that's one instance where it's slightly different. That Great Britain is still, as far as we're aware, planning to have its own individual mark that needs to be used rather than the one recognised across the EU. So that's the big change. Hopefully not a lot to kind of change and get your head around there. There is another change for conformity assessments and marking of products, and this all comes from the fact that the United Kingdom has applied to be a member of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I'm not repeating again. So basically what this means is when we're ratified fully as a member, which is expected by the end of next month, the end of October, it means that we will have to recognise conformity assessments and conformity bodies across all members of the partnership. So that includes countries such as Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Mexico, Singapore, Vietnam. Basically all of the countries that you see on that map in green. So effectively, if a product has been assessed by a conformity body in that country and it's been confirmed to conform to standards, then that needs to be recognised in the UK or can be recognised. So watch out for kind of updates on that, and that might make some sort of impacts on your supply chains and what you can accept. But we'll now look through some of the smaller updates across various different topics. So finance and sustainability reporting. First change happens every year. Environmental taxes and levies have been updated. And this is mainly through the Finance Act, but there are certain separate laws for specific jurisdictions in Great Britain. However, the rates tend to be the same across jurisdictions. So the updated rate for landfill is £103.70 per tonne, and the updated rate for plastic waste is £217.85 pence per tonne. So that's the same across, a slight increase on both of those compared to last year. The Green Gas Support Scheme has been extended until the 31st of March 2028. If you're not aware of what this is, it's a scheme that encourages the use of equipment to produce biomethane and biogas. Might not be relevant to a lot of you, but if it has any relevance, or you were thinking of looking at generating biomethane or biogas, the scheme is open until March 2028. And a big one for those operating in energy-intensive industries, operators can now claim 60% of their eligible electricity costs back. So this is a scheme that's available to any operators that have an EII, or energy-intensive industry certificate. Basically, if you have that certificate for a quarter, you're allowed to claim up to 60% of your electricity costs during that quarter. Only eligible electricity costs, not all electricity costs. And the scheme is funded through a levy paid by electricity suppliers. So if you do operate in any industries that are EII, have a look into that, because that could be a potential way of cutting your costs. Moving on, some more finance updates. The boiler upgrade scheme's been extended until the 31st of March 2028. This is for England. Basically, it's where grants are issued for upgrading boilers to those that are more efficient. So that's been extended. The last applications are at the end of 2027, because you have to give 3 months notice. As well as it being extended, there are a few key changes as well. There's been additional grant levels added, and eligibility has been extended to include more types of equipment. So it now includes heat pumps with a capacity up to 300 kilowatts. It also includes biomass boilers with an integrated cooking function. The carbon capture revenue support mechanism has been introduced. This is only relevant if your organisation captures carbon. If you do, basically, these regulations set out the framework for revenue support contracts. And basically, it allows the establishment of what they call carbon capture counterparties. These are organisations who will offer support contracts for financial support to those that actually capture carbon. So, again, if relevant, go and have a look at that. Full details I don't believe have been fully fleshed out, but it's something certainly to look at. Another one that's been updated is countryside stewardship payment rates. This is relevant if you're in the agricultural sector, or you're a landowner or farmer in rural areas. This basically gives payments for those who manage their land in a way that benefits wildlife, the environment, or the rural economy. If it's relevant, you're probably all aware of it. This is just saying, yeah, the payment rates have been increased this year for those activities. So again, have a look if it's relevant. There are also big changes on sustainability reporting on the horizon, both for the EU and member states, as well as the UK. The EU, as per usual, is slightly ahead of the UK. So a couple of years ago, they introduced a directive. So you've got there the directive, and if you're in the Republic of Ireland, this directive has now been put into Irish law through those regulations in the Companies Act. And essentially what the requirement is, that sustainability reporting is required for financial years that began on or after the 1st of January this year. So assuming that most organisations, the financial year starts in April, your financial year that started in April, it's going to require sustainability reporting if your organisation meets the following thresholds. And this is staggered as a phased introduction, so it's not going to apply to all organisations, and it only applies to the biggest at the start. So in terms of how it applies and when it comes in, from the 1st of January 2024, or basically for financial years starting from that point, it applies to large public interest organisations. Large organisations in general are those over 250 employees, turnover exceeds 40 million, assets exceed 20 million, and that's in euros. So basically, if you meet three of those requirements, you're classed as a large organisation. Public interest means the company is public, i.e., shares are traded on a public stock exchange. So basically, for those companies, it'll apply for the financial year that starts this year. Just on that, public interest organisations, as well as those that are listed on stock exchanges, it does also include finance companies and insurance companies as well. So if you operate in those sectors, potentially worth having a look. This is going to apply from your financial year starting this year. If it doesn't start this year because you're not publicly traded, then other large organisations start having to do sustainability reporting for financial years starting on or after the 1st of January 2025. It then starts for financial years starting 1st of Jan 2026 and beyond for public interest SMEs. So smaller organisations that aren't a large organisation that are publicly traded. This does not apply to micro-sized organisations, though. So if you're really small, it should never apply. And in 2028, financial years that start from the 1st of January, the requirements will start to apply for non-EU parent companies, so companies established outside of the EU, i.e. groups with EU subsidiaries that operate within the European Union. So if that's as relevant, again, go and have a look at that and get familiar. Generally, the requirements are that you have to report sustainability as part of your annual director's report, i.e. what we traditionally would class as accounts, but it's being expanded to include things beyond just financial accounting. You need to go and get sustainability reports audited by a qualified independent auditor, just in the same way as accounts. So that's quite a big one. If it applies to you, it's going to require some proactive action to make sure you're compliant. Okay, moving on to waste and emissions then. A couple of updates here on waste and emissions. So if you're based in Scotland, there is a new code of practice on sampling and reporting at materials facilities. By materials facilities, these are facilities that process recyclable waste, and specifically for this one, it's those that process dry recyclable waste. What's happened is this code of practice has been brought in, and this code of practice will be referenced in all permits issued from the 1st of April 2025. So if you applied for a new permit from that date, then the conditions will refer to following this code of practice. Likewise, if you change your permit, again, your revised permit after the 1st of April 2025 will refer to this code, so you need to follow those. And the waste management licensing regulations in Scotland have been updated to link into this. What it will do is it'll bring in certain reporting requirements. So if your activities involve over 2 tons of hazardous waste or 2,000 tons of non-hazardous waste, then this could apply to you. It might also require to wider installations, not just those that predominantly process recyclable waste. And there's requirements for operators to keep records. Again, you think it may apply to you. You know, you can ask a question during the webinar, or if you're a Lust subscriber, send us a helpline and we'll be able to provide more guidance and advise how it applies to your organisation. This is sorry, I apologise. This reporting applies to wider industrial installations in the UK, EU, and Ireland. And this basically means that large industrial installations need to report records on emissions, basically. It includes all emissions, all pollutant releases, and any waste that is transferred off-site. Again, this is where you're kind of managing large amounts of hazardous and non-hazardous waste. So if you are involved as an industrial installation again and you wanted to know whether it applies, let us know. There have been some changes to eco-design requirements. So eco-design requirements are certain requirements for products such as energy efficiency or the design of them to use materials that are easily recyclable to make sure they're efficient and minimize the impact on the environment. So the EU has introduced a regulation that basically covers the framework of how eco-design requirements are established. You might be aware that there's several different laws covering specific eco-design requirements for certain products. Some of those have been updated within the last few months. And basically when new eco-design requirements are put in or they're updated, then they will have to follow this framework. So some of the products that have been updated over the last 6 months are fans driven by electric motors, condensing units for refrigeration and local space heaters. So some of those have been updated and kind of follow this framework now. So that's waste and emissions, not too much in there. We'll now get onto building and planning. Quite a few changes here, nothing that kind of overhauls everything. If you attended the last webinar in March, you probably remember that we discussed all of the changes kind of supporting the overhaul of building control in England and Wales. There are a few snippets that link into that, but it's not as extensive and requiring totally different processes and approaches as them. So, changes to building and planning. Firstly, those updates to building control. Relatively simple. Basically, the law has changed in England. If you're making modifications and doing building works that impact fire safety, that must now be approved by a registered building control approver. It can be approved by a building inspector. And Building Safety Act and laws in Wales, they've been updated now to reference the role of registered building control approvers in Wales. So you might remember it was kind of introduced back end of last year, first in England. Wales followed suit. So they've been updating their legislation to make sure that it all references the updated scheme where registered building control approvers are part of the process. Another change in Wales is that automatic fire suppression is now required for care homes for children. So the previous laws required this only for care homes for children under the age of 5 and care homes for adults. So there was a gap for basically residents where they were above the age of 5 to 18. That gap has now been closed. This will apply from the 17th of December. So any care home in England, in Wales specifically, must have automatic fire suppression from that point. Been changes for non-dwellings in England, and these must have separate male and female toilets where it is possible. This is a rule that applies from the 1st of October. So it doesn't apply to dwellings, so domestic housing accommodation, but it applies to all other buildings essentially. So you need to either have separate male and female toilets, or if space does not allow, you need to have universal toilets. And that basically is where a self-contained room that is lockable contains both a toilet and a sink. So that applies to all buildings. There are a few exceptions to that. So individual residential rooms within a building, care homes and schools aren't required to follow those new rules. But yeah, requires some potential changes for some organisations. More updates on building and planning. There's been updated rules on stop notices, enforcement, and compliance actions that can be taken by authorities. So this is local authorities, or it might be the building regulator or HSE. So authorities can now issue stop notices lasting 56 days where they suspect work is not authorised and approved by building control. So basically, yeah, if you're doing any building that hasn't got the right approval and authorities suspect this, they can and force you to prevent continuation of that work for nearly 2 months. In England, there's a big change in terms of the period of time after which enforcement action can be taken. So previously in England, enforcement action for unauthorised development could only take place within 4 years of the development having been completed. This is extended to 10 years now. So basically, it's allowing authorities to take action against unscrupulous developers for a longer time period because they've seen historically that non-compliance might take many years before it is discovered, and at which point they might not have any legal comeback. So that has now been changed and extended. In Wales, specific consent is now required for significant infrastructure projects. This essentially means large-scale infrastructure projects that relate to things like utilities infrastructure, highways and railways, wastewater plants, and hazardous waste facilities. So if you are involved in any of those large-scale significant infrastructure projects, you will need specific consent to undertake them in Wales moving forward. Meanwhile, permitted development rights have been extended in Scotland. So Scotland has relaxed some of the laws that it has where planning permission and permits required. So some of the changes include extensions to domestic premises can now be larger without requiring planning permission. Some types of renewable energy projects are encouraged and require limited permission. That includes things like the replacement of windows, installation of solar canopies, small-scale generation equipment, generally for domestic premises, things like that. So basically makes it easy to get approval on permission, or in some cases it might not require any specific permission. It also, if you work in the agricultural sector, it allows and makes it easier for you to convert agricultural buildings for those for non-agricultural use. So that might be of some relevance. As well, in Scotland, a cladding assurance register has been established. This basically is a register where all cladding on building that poses a safety risk must be logged and stored, which then supports the identification and assessment of different types of cladding on building. And it'll basically, the register will be used to support the government and authorities making orders that require developers or landlords to remedy residential buildings where the cladding is unsafe. There are new EU rules on the energy performance of buildings. Just to highlight, this is an EU directive, so it won't apply directly to member states until each member state actually introduces their own national laws, i.e. regulations covering this. So it's something, if you're in the Republic of Ireland or another EU member state, watch out for laws coming in over the next couple of years on this. The directive requires is that each member state must introduce laws requiring improved energy performance, and basically it will require that for new public buildings, any that are built from the 1st of January 2028 are zero emission. And from the 1st of January 2030, that requirement for zero emission will apply for all of the new buildings. So quite a significant one there that the EU is driving as part of its net zero campaign and improving efficiency of buildings. So yeah, keep your eyes out for that if you're based in the EU or you do work in the EU around buildings. Finally, for building and planning, energy performance data sharing rules have been changed for England and Wales. So previously, it was very difficult to get data on energy performance assessments. However, this law basically has allowed since June that data to be shared with owners of the building, landlords of the building, and occupiers of the building. You can't get it for every building, but any buildings that are relevant to you. So if you're the landlord of a building and you want to see the energy performance data that was used as part of the energy assessment, you can get it for your building, etc. So that might be of use to some of you. Moving on to vehicles, only a few changes here, but a really significant one for the EU. So we'll start with that. Whilst I talk about this being significant for the EU, for those of us that are in the UK, it will impact vehicles that we drive and use on the roads here, given the fact that they're manufactured to European standards, often within European countries. So the EU has defined their Euro 7 specifications, and these Euro specifications historically have covered the energy efficiency and emissions of engines and exhaust gases, but this extends it. It includes emissions such as microplastic, emissions from tyres, and particle emissions from brake systems. And basically, new cars in the future that are play and other vehicles will have to comply with these specifications. Again, it comes in on a phased approach, as with a lot of EU specifications, and it varies depending on the type of the vehicle, whether it's a new type of vehicle or an existing model, or it's a component or system of vehicles. The main dates that you probably need to be aware of is 29th of November 2026. So new types of cars and vans, so like commercial vehicles, they will need to apply and adhere to Euro 7 specifications by that point. The date for heavy goods vehicles, so lorries, buses that transport people, and heavy trailers, that comes in about 18 months after. So they will need to comply with the Euro 7 specification from the 29th of May 2028. If you are involved in vehicle manufacture or the supply chain of equipment for vehicle manufacture, if you need more help on this in terms of specific application dates for certain components, etc., let us know. We'll be happy to help. Also in the EU and the Republic of Ireland, there's been changes to heavy duty vehicles emissions premiums. This basically applies to vehicles and trailers that exceed 3.5 tons. They need to comply now with CO2 emission performance standards by the 1st of January 2025. Otherwise, if they don't comply, then the manufacturer will be required to pay a premium. So that is in advance and in addition to Euro 7. So that's basically bringing more vehicles and more stringent emission performance standards in line with rules. Final couple of updates for vehicles. If you've seen our articles or you're a Lust subscriber, you might have seen this dropping in to register a few months ago. Great Britain has introduced the Automated Vehicles Act. In itself doesn't do a huge amount in terms of duties or setting specifically defined rules. However, it sets the framework up for the approval of automated vehicles. Great Britain planning, well, I say planning, this was announced during the previous government, so that is subject to change. But basically, the UK government announced that they wanted automated vehicles and automated vehicle licensing to be in place by 2026. So watch this space on that because it could make a huge difference in terms of logistics as well as domestic transport. In Ireland, little one here, but might be relevant particularly for delivery companies, local delivery companies, that is, electric scooters and legally allowed to be used on Irish roads. It's updated the Road Traffic and Roads Act. The rules are that electric scooters can be only used by riders over the age of 16. There are certain specifications in terms of scooters and top speed and things like that. However, driving license registration and insurance isn't required. So a real relaxation of the rules there to promote the use of e-scooters. Final section for our legal updates for September is wildlife. Not too many changes here. The first one is, I would imagine, not relevant to most of you, but deer hunting seasons have been updated in the Republic of Ireland. The dates vary depending on the species of deer, so any relevance, go and have a look at that piece of legislation which defines the permitted hunting seasons. In England, Wales and Scotland, there have been changes to licensing requirements for glue traps and snares. So glue trap licensing requirements have been updated for England and Wales, and then for snares used for trapping and killing animals in Scotland, their use and duties have been updated as well. So go and have a look at those if any relevance. And the final one for wildlife and the legal update this month is there are new rules protecting hedgerows in England. I say new rules, they're really actually the old rules, or they're extremely similar to the old rules. So if you're not aware, under the EU Common Agricultural Policy, there was a requirement to protect important hedgerows. We lost that post-Brexit. This is bringing rules back in to protect hedgerows in England. Very similar. Important hedgerows are those over 20 metres in length or those that join other hedgerows at both ends. There's certain requirements about protecting hedgerows, including the fact that you're not allowed to cut and trim them between March and August each year due to nesting birds and the need to protect them. There are some exceptions, such as you're allowed to cut them back and trim them for safety reasons. But if you have important hedgerows on your premises, worth having a look at that in terms of what you are allowed and what you cannot allow, not allowed to do. But if you're familiar with the old rules, you will see that they are very similar. So that is my part of the webinar, which you'll be pleased to hear on the legal updates. I am now going to turn my camera off and I will pass over to my colleague Alison, who is going to run through some of the key changes that we know about or were expected that are on the horizon over coming months.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. As Matt says, I'm going to take you through what's on the horizon, and we are going to start with the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And this, or commonly known as CBAM, this will impose a carbon price to cover emissions from manufacturing carbon-intensive products that are imported into the EU. Importers will have to register, report, and pay for the emissions. Products currently covered by the scheme include cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. The aim of the scheme is to try and ensure that EU importers who pay higher carbon taxes aren't at a disadvantage for cheaper imports. It's currently in a transition phase in the EU, so EU importers have to register, record, and report their emissions, but they don't yet have to pay for it. From 2026, the full EU regime will apply when organisations will then have to purchase the certificates to offset their emissions for the products they import. The UK is set to introduce its own system from 2027. This will include glass and ceramics, but at the moment won't include electricity. At the minute, there's no legal requirements under the UK regime, but we would like to encourage organisations who might be subject to it in the future to start keeping track of emissions data now. Next up, we have ETS. The emissions trading scheme introduced a cap and trade system on greenhouse gases that can be emitted by sectors such as energy producers, energy-intensive industries, aviation. There have been some recent consultations which have included proposals to expand the scheme to include electricity generated by waste and waste incineration, as well as to try and gather feedback on integrating greenhouse gas removals into the scheme. The feedback on both of these consultations is being reviewed by the government, and the next application window for those eligible for free allocations have been pushed to the 1st of April and the 30th of June next year. Next up, we have the deposit and return scheme. This scheme is to try and promote the recycling of materials and increase recycling rates. Customers will have to pay a deposit when purchasing a drink in a single-use container, and this deposit will then be refunded back to them when the container is returned for recycling. The implementation of the scheme has been delayed to October 2027, and it will apply to plastic, steel and aluminium drinks containers between 150ml and 3 litres that are produced in volumes of 5,000 units or more. The requirements for glass containers will be set out separately, and Scotland's scheme will be amended to be brought in line with the rest of the UK. Next, we have ESOS, and ESOS is the mandatory energy assessment and savings scheme for larger organisations and their wider corporate groups or smaller organisations within large groups. Those required to comply with ESOS have to audit their energy usage every 4 years. And for phase 3 onwards, there are additional compliance stages that require an action plan as well as annual progress updates. At the moment, the action plan needs to be signed off and submitted by the deadline, which is the 5th of December 2024, so this year. Next, we have single-use cups. So the Scottish Government have proposals to require all suppliers of drinks that come in single-use disposable beverage cups to apply a charge when the drink is bought at the point of sale. The charge is proposed for all single-use cups, including any that are marketed as biodegradable. It only wouldn't apply to drinks given for free, and there is speculation on further exemptions based on the purpose or settings. So in schools or when a drink's purchased from a vending machine, it wouldn't really be feasible to implement. And this has been done as part of the Circular Economy Act, and feedback on this is open until the 14th of December. And last up, we have the National Planning Policy Framework. So proposed reforms have been proposed to try and accelerate sustainable housing development, infrastructure, and to try and have development that's resistant to climate change. Some of the reforms include environmental aspects like increasing support for renewable energy schemes, tackling climate change to try and safeguard environmental resources, as well as allowing for housing development on greenbelt land. We do expect the new Labour government to introduce and update legislation covering wider environmental issues to try and fast track the movement towards net zero, but at the moment there's not much set in stone. We also expect that, based on the recommendations from the Grenfell inquiry, we will see additional legislation changes with regards to fire safety and high-risk buildings. So that's it for the On the Horizon section. We are now going to move to the Q&A section, and I bring back Matt and my colleague Valentin.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Matt. So, as Alison said, we are moving now to the Q&A section. Unsurprisingly, most questions we received refer to the new waste separation rules. We will try to answer as many of them as we can, but I'll just repeat that whatever remains unanswered, we will take them offline, and then a copy of all answers will be sent to all attendees. The first question comes from James, asking about premises that don't fall under the new waste collection rules, but the waste collection company has said they will require us to separate recycling waste. What should we do? Well, as an organization, the main duties for organizations are to ensure that you have arrangements in place for waste collection and to segregate the waste as agreed with your waste collector. So, back to your question, if your premises don't fall under the new collection rules, we would recommend you to discuss this with the waste collector and try to amend the collection arrangements and customize it accordingly to work for you, to put it simply. If you can't reach an agreement with your waste collector, then your options are either to comply with the waste collector's requirement and segregate as they instruct, or you could look at finding a new supplier for waste collection services. But this would be down to you to decide. Second question, again on waste segregation. This one is about composting small quantities of food waste. So we produce a small amount of food waste. Can we compost this rather than having it collected by a waste collector? The simple answer here is yes. As part of the waste management, everyone is required to apply the waste hierarchy. So that being said, recycling would come before disposal. So yes, composting on site of small quantities of waste, that should be okay. This type of activity normally would qualify for a T23 exemption, but you need to be aware that quantity and storage limits will apply. So if you're planning on composting small quantities, then yes, most likely you will be able to do that, and you might need to apply for a T23 exemption. The next question, again on waste segregation, comes from Mayu. We are collecting food waste as part of general waste. Do we need to separate specific to food waste only? So I assume the question is from next year if food waste will need to be segregated separately. The short answer is yes. It will need to be separated from the general waste and other recycling streams.
Just on that, Valentin and everyone, just because I've been having a look at through the questions, there's quite a few questions about whether you have to arrange recycling and separate collection for things that you don't actually produce as waste. The answer is no. So just going back to kind of the new rules, the requirement to separate and collect garden waste separately doesn't apply to commercial and industrial buildings whatsoever. They only have to look at the 5 waste streams, not that. If you are an organisation where your premises doesn't produce any waste of a specific type, no, that doesn't need separation and collection because it simply doesn't exist. So if you think of like 6 waste streams, it's only the ones that are actually applicable to your premises that you would have to look at separating, certainly from your household or household type waste, and then individually potentially depending on what your waste collection provider is doing. So hopefully that helps clarify things. But no, if you don't have a certain type of waste, you don't need to consider it for separation and collection.
Thank you for clarifying, Matt. And I think we answered quite a few already on waste separation. Everything else will be answered offline. Let's answer a few from a different topic. This one, the next one is on manufacturing of tires and on the new Euro 7 requirements. We manufacture tires. When do the new requirements under Euro 7 apply? There are different dates for the new Euro 7 requirements to apply, but specifically for tires, this will very much depend on the type of tire. So short answer, they will start applying from 1st of July of 2028 for new types of C1 class tires. Then from 1st of April 2030 for new types of C2 class tires. And then from 1st of April 2032 for new types of C3 class tires. I hope this answers your question. Thank you very much. And then I think I still have time for one more. Yes, there's still time for one more. This one is on sustainability reporting. Are there any plans for the UK to mandate sustainability reporting like the EU has? Yes, the UK is currently planning to mandate sustainability reporting. The government currently is looking to create the UK sustainability reporting standards, which will result from the endorsement of 2 existing international standards, which, by the way, summaries for both are available on LAS. These 2 standards are published by the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, IFRS, and they are IFRS S1, General Requirements for Disclosure of Sustainability-Related Financial Information, and IFRS S2, Climate-Related Disclosure. So the plan now is to endorse these 2, and a decision on the endorsement is expected in Q1 of 2025. There's also an implementation plan, but all the following steps will depend on the endorsement of these two standards, which, as I said, is expected for the first quarter of 2025, and then from then onwards, the next steps will follow at different dates. Other than that, these were pretty much the main questions from my list. Do you guys have any? Alison, Matt, do you have any that you would like to reply now?
I have some that I can go through. So let me find it. There was one that I think was from Thea, about waste transfer notes and waste carrier licenses being replaced. I've heard this but can't find anything online about it. So what I think you could be referring to is that there was a consultation around the waste carriers, brokers and dealers, and there are plans to change them to waste controllers, waste transporters and controller transporters, and that will replace registrations with an environmental permit or exemptions for that. At the moment, the response has been published. We know what they want to do. We don't know when. They've not given us any dates when they are going to actually make the change to this. So it is in the process, and you can read the consultation outcome. You can see what the proposed changes will be, but we don't have any dates on when it will actually be changed at the moment. It was a consultation, and if you are a LUS subscriber, we do actually have a section on health and safety and environmental consultations that are open that you can give your feedback on. I would also just like to clarify, so we've had a few questions about the ESOS deadline. So just to clarify, whilst they still want organisations to aim for December, it has been extended until next March. I think it's the 5th of March 2025. So yeah, they want you to aim for December, but if you can't, then plans will still be accepted until then. And there's also one, we've had quite a few helplines around this as well, so I might just address it here, about CBAM. If you're a UK manufacturer, do you need to comply with it? Now, at the moment, CBAM is only in force in the EU, so you don't need to comply with that. The UK government is going to implement it with a current start date of January 2027. But whilst there's no direct duties for you under the EU CBAM, you might, if you manufacture things, you might still be required to supply emissions data for those, for companies who import products from you. So they will normally contact you and ask for that data. And if they haven't, and you still think you might be in an applicable sector, then we do advise just to start keeping the data anyway. Matt, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's been loads on waste collection and separation, beyond what Valentin covered. So we'll cover those all together, and we'll send you out a copy of all of the answers to those, because there's some nice scenarios. There's a couple of questions around kind of conformity marking assessments and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and kind of acceptance of CE marking and things like that. So one of the questions was about whether we would basically put standards recognised by other members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership ahead of our own UK standards. No, the answer is basically, it's not really about the standards per se, it's about the UK accepting conformity bodies who do the assessments and confirm that products conform to standards that the UK is accepting, rather than the actual standard itself. So we might still have UK legislation or requirements that say that this product must meet these standards. What the new rules will mean is that that can be assessed by a conformity body in one of those countries, and we would accept that rather than it needing to be checked as conforming by a body in the UK. So similar to in the past, we've always accepted conformity bodies across the EU as doing effective assessments. Another question was about UK CA marking and whether it needs to be used rather than kind of just CE marking. So effectively, there's no real requirement to use UK CA marking now for products. If you wanted to just apply CE marking, because that will now be accepted indefinitely through the whole of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the EU, you could technically do that because it will be accepted. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, because you've probably seen on products you've purchased over the last few years, a lot of them now will have UKCA marking separate to CE marking. Whether that will change or manufacturers and suppliers will kind of do the two together as they really do at the minute, we'll see that. We'll have to see. Fab. So, nearly out of time. So, loads and loads of questions that we haven't answered here, a lot of them on waste collection and separation, which we will pick up and send you a copy of all of the kind of answers, because there's lots of different scenarios and permutations. Just on that one, what I would advise is, if these changes are going to affect your organisation, whether it's from kind of March next year, or you're thinking about kind of your own domestic premises, your home from the year after, the best thing to do is either contact your waste collector or wait for information and instructions from them, because they will be telling you what the rules are that they have to abide by, and they will tell you what you need to do to comply with that. So for some areas, they might be just collecting all the dry recyclables together still, in which case they will say to you, no, just collect them together. In some circumstances that we say, no, we want those four completely separating from each other, and you'll have to have separate bins for each. That's up to you, your local collector. That isn't absolutely defined in the regulations beyond the fact that ideally all of the waste streams should be separated, but in reality, I don't imagine that will apply uniformly across the whole of England. So that's it for this month's Legal Update webinar on the Horizon and Q&A. Thank you for Alison and Valentin for supporting with this. I hope everyone found it useful. Thanks a lot for dialing in today and watching. We will get those questions sent to you as well as a recording of the video as soon as possible. If you do need any information about the compliance people, you can find it on our website, thecompliancepeople.co.uk. We offer additional services as well as legal registers and updates, including on-site consultancy and auditing. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much for attending all. Hope you found it useful and wish you all the best for the rest of the week.